I can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you, Don and John. Again, I'm Sean with EAPC Architects Engineers. Just share my screen real quick. And for those who aren't familiar with us, EAPC is a full-service AE firm specializing in design for schools. We've been around for just over 50 years based out of North Dakota. And we met with the North Dakota Safety Council through our combined efforts in safety in schools. At the time, it was in different events. I think it was right after a school shooting. And we thought, as architects and engineers, we're not responders. And so we really wanted to get the experts involved in our schools. And North Dakota Safety Council and Don became involved in a couple assessments we did, one in Western North Dakota and one in Bismarck. One was a renovation, one was a new school, just to see, it's a litmus test. How are we doing? Are we doing well in our design or poorly? And what can we improve? And this partnership has continued to develop as we go through these processes. We have a combined effort, too, we found out through discussions in preparing schools for opening this fall. I did have a small group of superintendents I've been working with that have been actively involved in helping us figure out, what is this going to look like? What have been the successes, especially last year as schools closed? They had to do distance learnings. What were the major challenges, and what can we do, as your designers and part of your team to help you in this reopening and preparing for the fall also now? And so we do have this continued effort with this small group of superintendents and schools, and are trying to keep our information as current as possible. But we're just one source of many. As Don said, we'll go through a virtual tour here. I'm going to start that in a second. And this tour, I'll have a link, and it's available to anybody who wants. But we found out that the link expires after a week, and so we're going to put this on our own servers and then provide a different link for anybody who's interested in using this or taking a look at it and using it at their school. So moving forward, this is what the VR is going to look like. These are different spaces that we're tackling. The exterior entrance is you come into the school, and then your interior, whether you're going to be screening or not. Your administrative office, which, is your one point of contact after the doors are locked, trying to get, people through there. What does that look like now? How well can that be used? Cafeterias, corridors for circulation. You got major students. Some of you have lockers in your corridors. What issues may you have, and how can you help with that? Then we took a look at some specific classrooms, music rooms, shops, and then different ways of putting together a typical classroom. And so you can see one-on-one. This may be a resource area, collaborative social distancing, and then that nurse's room or that quarantine area. And finally, we're taking a look at gyms. And there's a few other things that we'll go through as I walk through this process. So this is going to take me to a link. It takes a second to open. And I don't know if you decide that you would like this link, I don't know if it'll take as long if it's off of our server, but again, we can provide this. Now, this is a virtual school. As Don mentioned, this is a made-up school. And, some of the spaces may be a little bit different than what you have. You may be dealing with smaller spaces, or have entirely different options than this, but we're just walking through these areas one at a time and addressing as much as we can. And specifics can be answered maybe in a different formats, or a one-on-one conversation that we can have after the presentation, or contact info will be provided after. So you can see in this is the outside of a school. Typical schools in our northern climate have an airlock or a vestibule. You have an exterior set of doors, and you have an interior set of doors. So people can come and get out of the elements. And in this particular rendering, what you can see is we've recommended these social distancing little orange marks. And this shows one direction. The blue shows a separate with some some arrows here. We're not saying that you need to do arrows, but what this does is it provides a visual cue as well as the enter and exit signs that provide the a written cue of where to come in and where to leave, and just help students and visitors. They know, okay, I come in here and I go out. Now, some schools only have one set of doors, and so that could be a challenge, or maybe they have two. Again, there's ways that we can help you work through that. Now, the navigation for this, and let's see if I can figure out. Okay, so here's the navigation screen. It gets covered by the zoom, this little zoom thing. And that just takes you through the different areas. And so I'm going to go into the entryway now. As you see here, we've got that orange with one direction, the blue with another. Now, this is quite a spacious, nice entryway here. There's a small table if you are going to provide screening. Initially, I know when my daughter had a baby at daycare, they didn't have any screening. They just asked, do you have a fever or not? Now they are actually doing screening, and they take the child's temperature before they're admitted in. And then if they read high, they actually take it again, because sometimes you do have false readings. We haven't yet had to bring the baby back, but that does happen. And so, they're setting up a table with the information. Maybe you have some wall space here, and then many, the TV. And I know that many schools have the television option, or they have cable running through. If you don't, then that's something that can be added fairly easily throughout your school, so that you can give information, through all the major areas and classrooms. Now, I'm not talking when I zoom around because I believe the bandwidth interrupts my audio, so I don't want to do that. I'm looking back at the entry, and in this case, you can see you walk in this outside set of doors, and then there's an inside set of doors that would go into the office space or the admin space, and many times these doors are locked then during school. So the students come in, but once all the students are in, these are locked. Again, the social distance markings, and there are some products and there are some companies that offer these. You can put these in your right into your flooring, or they can be applied on top of the flooring depending on how you want to do it. Or maybe you do have some existing markings that would work well. One elementary principal in a school we're working with was asking just to have some markings in the floor, because those elementary kids, she could just keep them on a better path if they had a visual cue to follow instead of just the a spoken cue, or trying to keep them in a line. If you don't have this option, that's fine. But in this case, there's an option. One other thing I'd like to mention too is one thing is you can do is create hands-free opening. And so that means as you approach the door opens. And if you have electrified hardware on your door, where maybe you have a buzzing system or those sort of things, we can take a look at the ability to use that to provide an automatic opening door, similar to maybe a grocery store or something. So you don't have that point of contact on the handles that you're constantly working, as people are pulling those doors open. Here we have the admin office. So this is through that set of doors in the vestibule, however you have it, whether it's through signage, but this is where your visitors would come in. In this case, we're showing this is fairly aggressive. Maybe this is done with a rug or something. We're not recommending it has to be this orange 6-foot zone thing, but you've seen these in grocery stores and different places where you just have the markings. And again, here's our cue, our visual cue for keeping people moving through the space. What's important to look at here is just keeping your staff safe. We show some glass here, and these are products that can be purchased. I have a list of products. We're not endorsing any certain product, but these are things that you can add to maybe your administrative area to just keep your workers safe, and then keep your visitors safe as well. In this virtual school, we're moving into the cafeteria, which and just in this case is connected to the entrance. So you're looking back through the school into the cafeteria. Again, I'm going to go over this circulation thing. Orange one way, blue the other way. This is just a visual, and it just help keep the kids moving, and staff as well, without having people, tell them here's the way in and here's the way out. Now, if you decide you do want to use your cafeteria, there are options. These glass enclosures, so each kid can, or each child can eat, right next to another one. However, they're separated through the glass. Now, these would have to be cleaned between each, lunch time period, and but it would allow you to have more kids in one area. Now, maybe you have a couple tables that, as I talked about earlier, the herd mentality. This is a third grade class, and then the fourth grade class has a couple other tables. So even if there is a little bit of interaction, it is students that are together the whole time.
And Sean, just for clarification, you say glass, but that is a plexiglass material, right?
It is plexiglass. Yeah, I keep calling it glass, but it is plexiglass. Glass would be quite heavy and probably not very, very easy to move around or store. Visually, what we're showing here is a typical cafeteria table with a 6-foot social distancing. As you can see, you're not going to be able to feed many kids at one time at all. And you may not have the cafeteria space to do this sort of thing. And so if that is the case, you may look at this glass or plexiglass partitions on the tables, or even having a cart and feeding the students in their classrooms. And I think that DPI is recommending that right now, or they were when we did our first set of webinars. Our recommendation was to feed the kids in the classroom. So if you have that capability, that probably would be a better option. But visually, this is how it plays out. And so you can see this is, with circulation, with the 6-foot distancing, this really makes your lunch period not able to accommodate very many children at all. Another thing just to point out in here, I'll talk about this a little bit further, but you can see there's like a small classroom. In this case, this virtual school at a breakout space. Well, what's nice is maybe you can have a small class here at the same time, and you've got the glass, and we'll take a look at these a little bit later on. But multi-use of space is one thing you may have to consider. If you have a shop class, and we have one further down in this virtual reality, but if you have a shop class, those are rather large classrooms. And I know with some districts that we work with, their shop class is either closed or it's just storage right now because they actually do not have a teacher for VOAG or their 4-H program. And so they just use it for storage and other uses that may have to be opened up, or maybe an option to open that back up, because you can get a fairly large amount of students in there with the 6-foot social distancing. Now, your typical corridor in many schools is, you've got a corridor with some lockers in it, or a double-loaded corridor with classrooms off of it, or maybe you have pods, but you have these area spaces that connect different parts of your school. In this case, it's a long corridor. So we're looking at different things in this corridor. In this case, there's no lockers on the one side, just lockers on the other. And maybe allowing locker time to only be one class at a time. So again, that herd mentality. But many lockers are broken up by, here's the 3rd grade bank, here's the 4th grade bank. The actual locker bays, where you have large amounts of lockers and large amounts of students between classes, you may want to consider limiting use on those, because you just can't have the social distancing in there when you have a couple hundred kids in the locker bays. So keeping the lockers may be assigned by classrooms. And maybe some of you don't have lockers, or it's a backpack option that comes into the classroom. That is another one. I know in our climate, many of our clients do ask for lockers for a couple reasons. One is coats and boots and all those sort of things. Where do you put them? And the other one is just the spread of things like lice, that keeps that from happening. Taking a look at this restroom. In this case, we have no doors on the restroom. Many of the more up-to-date schools don't have that. It initially is for bullying, so it's maybe taking the exterior door off to limit, the contact with the handles is something you could do. It'd be very important to take a look at your sight lines. You don't want to take that door off and then have somebody walking down the hallway be able to look right into the bathroom. So if you don't have that option, then the cleaning of the handles is something to look at. But if you do, opening that entryway up is something that would be very helpful. What we also have here is a green light and a red light. And the green light and red light is something that it's low voltage LEDs can be added quite easily into your corridor. And that can mean, hey, you know what, go ahead and travel, or red, no travel allowed in the corridor right now. And so students know, hey, I can't travel. So that's, it's just a simple traffic light thing, green and red. If you're colorblind, there's always exceptions to the rule, right? So if you're colorblind, that may not work as well. You'll have to say, if the left one or the right one, that sort of thing. And then we have a drinking fountain set up here. Many drinking fountains, they have an option for ADA accessibility, and then they have a standing option. And in this case, we also have a sanitation area right here. Now, we would recommend not using the actual mouth faucets. That you don't want to touch those. You have to push on them to get them going. But there are kits, or maybe you have these available, that have the bottle fillers, and these are no touch. There's a little light sensor that fills the bottle. And I know it's important that kids stay hydrated, and there's that walking around with the bottle. So maybe encouraging kids to bring a water bottle with them instead of using the drinking fountains, and then use that bottle option, or getting a kit that can transform your existing one into that bottle option. That is something we can help you get that information as well. LK is a company that has that kit if you do have LK drinking fountains. And finally, this circulation, I'll point it out again, blue going one direction, orange going the other, and then some arrows just to help out here. So taking a look at classrooms, we talked a little bit about music and choir. So here's maybe band, or maybe this is an orchestra room. You've got the markings on your floor. In this case, it's with tape, just to show what it looks like. And this is 6 feet apart. Now, this is a rather large classroom, and you may not have that option. Maybe you have band on the stage, or maybe you have choir in a much smaller room. But you can see you can only fit a certain amount. And in this perfect virtual world, of course, we have a completely separate choir area in this classroom. But we're showing right here risers, and risers is a natural separation. We have the glass, you can see that. But even with that, there's not many students you can fit. So as they said, ensembles may be a better option. Smaller groups, definitely. And, this is maybe you don't have a music program, or maybe you're just starting one, or those sort of things, and you don't have many periods that are offered. Then maybe you can offer more periods of these things and break it down a little bit more. Or if you do have a large music room, you can take that room and then be able to use it for a different classroom option, maybe a larger group classroom. Some have built-in tiers, and you would have to take a look at measuring those tiers, see how far they are apart. Here we're showing the glass also, so that, as they're singing, they're not spreading through breathing, or, that mouth, the droplets aren't going on top of the kid in front of them. We get into the classrooms a little bit. This may be a resource setting, and many of you already have this kind of setting in your schools where you have a resource area. I know I did a school that has many private rooms for the resource area, and that may work actually pretty well, because you can get away from the other groups. Now, my daughter is she's an aide at a school, and she does work in the resource area, and she told me there was probably no way any of her students would wear a mask or keep it on. And so then maybe the option is to not have the mask on the child, but have it on the actual para, or have it on the resource instructor. Smaller areas like this can be used as well. They not only block the, create different areas for your resource, but then they allow you to be able to clean these areas separately and keep these little teams separate from each other. And then small groups, again, we're just showing the PPE, not the mask, but the respirator on here. So collaborative classroom, and maybe that's not quite what you want to call it. But in this case, you can see we've got the plexiglass between these students. They can work as a group, but they can't contact each other. They can, look at each other, and that's about it. Cleaning these between classrooms may be a little bit difficult if it's where you're looking at a middle school or high school option where they travel from classroom to classroom. If it's elementary, then, that one student would occupy that the whole time and would be cleaned, as needed. What I'm showing here.
Hey, Sean.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to mention, since you just brought that up about, them going from classroom to classroom, is one of the risk reduction efforts that schools across the country are looking at is looking for opportunities where, right, we can keep groups of students from mixing. In other words, if we can keep certain groups of kids throughout the day, kind of the old homeroom rule, as much as possible, right, that will reduce the risk in your building. That's not going to be possible with every school schedule and every building and every grade. But where you have the opportunities to make that happen, that is going to reduce your risk. So, for example, if these kids were in this room that you're showing, were all together for several hours of the day and not having to move to other rooms, that would lower the risk for them and lower the risk of the building.
Right. Yeah. The mobility would be the teachers in this case. And I know I've worked with many school districts where, due to lack of classroom space, teachers had to move from room to room. And so they had a cart, they had everything set up. I know it wasn't ideal for them, but it may be something you already do and you would need to do more, or maybe an option that you would take a look at as you reopen. One issue here, as I was going to say, is there's only 16 kids in this classroom. This is a generous classroom in this virtual reality world. And so if you have smaller classrooms or those sort of things, it's going to be even more of a challenge. We're going to take a look at another option on the next slide here, the next VR presentation. But, if you have a classroom, you typically have a classroom of 24, you're only at 2/3 capacity. And one thing that you may want to think about is, what do I do with all that furniture? I've never worked with a school district that's had enough storage. They're always short on storage. And so if 1/3 of my furniture needs to move somewhere else, where is that going to go? And how does that look? And those are things that you might have to think about as you look at reopening. And we're shrinking these sizes of these classrooms. Where do we put the chairs, desks, all those sort of things? Here's what we're just calling a social distance classroom. It's actually a combination. And what we're showing is you can use these plexiglass dividers, and I think these dividers that we're showing here are by a company called Steelcase. They're a commercial furniture provider for schools, to separate side to side, so you don't need that 6-foot social distancing. So in this case, you've got some circulation along this wall. You've got a row of students. You have your glass, another row of students, and you can see we've got the 6-foot social distancing, another row of students, glass. And so in this case, and repeated, this allows you to get more students in a classroom. So in this case, you've got 4 per run. So 4, 8, you have 24 children or students in this classroom if, space allows. So if you have the smaller classrooms, this may be an option, because instead of this 6 feet between each of the groups, it's a combination of the two. You'll be less of these dividers and provide you also with circulation in and out of the classroom safely. So it's more of a combination thing to take a look at. If this is more of a typical, what you would think of an older classroom setting where you're looking at the front of the room. But if that's the case and you're still using those practices, this would work well. Now, we talked about maybe using areas that aren't in use anymore, or areas that are already larger areas. Now, in this case, it's a shop classroom. Shop classrooms have these large layout tables. They have, large spaces. And so they have social distancing sort of built in. And they have smaller classroom sizes, maybe 16. And so, if you're only using these twice a day, maybe if you just have shop those 2 times or a half a day, could this space be reused as maybe a math room, or an English room or a Spanish room? And so taking a look at those sort of options where the teacher travels again to these larger classrooms so you can get more kids or more students in these classrooms might be a good thing. So we're showing, this space and this layout, and this one, it's welding booths and those sort of things. But just, I guess part of the point of this too, and this could apply also to if you have a science lab, those lab stations have to be so far apart because there's just so much storage, and the stations are that far apart. Using those as maybe more than just your science classrooms, if you have that ability, you can keep your students further apart, and also have another classroom for use that may need to be something else. Now, your quarantine area, you may not all have the option of taking some space, usually right near your entrance, where you've got to pick up from parents or however you want to do it. And maybe there's an office that you would need to renovate, and then you would need to find space again for that person. But finding that quarantine area would be important if that is something that is required by DPI. In this case, we show there's the nurse here, and you've got a curtain. Now these curtains are very easily applied to the ceiling, so that's one thing you can use. They're easily cleaned. They're for use in a hospital environment. And then just taking a look at getting cleanable cots or those sort of things. And these have been offered by your furniture suppliers for years. I know that we have put furniture in schools that are, in case the kid gets sick and he ends up throwing up, you can clean it up quite easily, and, it's back to normal, and disinfect that. So here we're just showing, recommending having that coronavirus safety thing. One other product that we found is this. This is a ductless air purifier that actually takes out bacteria and viruses and does not have to be tied into your HVAC system. And so, I don't know the price on this unit, and maybe they have different price points, but, I don't know if I'd recommend this for every classroom. But taking a look at maybe your quarantine area is where you have this ductless one, and you spend that money in that area, so that you're not as worried about the cleaning. There's another product that's a UV lights thing that kills the viruses as well. And so taking a look at those sort of options that may be more expensive, but you would just have them in the smaller areas that are a little more high risk. That might work well. And then your gym space. Right now, what we're showing is the social distancing, as John recommended, having that social distancing. This is done through cones, and that way you're not putting markings on your gym floor that you don't want there permanently or that would interfere with your gym lines. And so here's a gym class, and they're social distanced. Your instructor in the front. If you have a larger gym space, maybe it's, you've got a full-size gym with 2, side courts, and you've got the divider between them, having 2 gym classes. Or if you're going to do PE in a different way, we're just showing a couple classrooms set up in here where you can have a full, students as well as, desks set up here. There are products that you see on the floor that are rolled out, and some of you are familiar with these and some are not, but these are on rolls and they protect your gym floor from chairs and desks, and those are the sort of things that you may need to, or you might want to put in there if you do have a classroom. Now, having 2 classes in a gym is not going to work. The sound's going to travel. But again, taking advantage of these spaces and making them different. One other one that we don't have rendered here would be the auditorium. And some of you do have auditoriums, some do not, especially smaller districts. But an auditorium, built for large classroom teaching environment, you can just put signs or close off chairs, and you can get a regular classroom in that space. So you can take a less utilized space and then just repurpose that for your, math class or English class or however that may work.
Sean, I have a quick question for you.
Okay.
Question from Stacy. Are there any resources that you might be able to recommend or have access to that would address more of like an early childhood classroom layout or things that might be done for those younger kids?
Yeah, we just talked about that as a company actually yesterday in the conversation, and much of what we're showing can be used in that early childhood setting. But right now we're doing a little bit of research on that. I guess I don't have, a definite answer for this. And maybe one of the other experts at the end, could talk about an early childhood setting as well. But we are looking into ourselves, and then, feel free to contact us and we'll keep you up to date as far as what we find out and how we see this laying out as they open. And early childhood, I don't know if you're talking about, infant through 4 or 5 year olds before they get into kindergarten. That is a different world and than it would be a typical classroom setting. So again, my contact information will be further on, and if I can't find the answer, then I can certainly put you in touch with somebody at EAPC or somebody else that could help you take a look at that.
Thank you, Sean.
Yep. I'm going to look at just some products and resources, and this by no means is a comprehensive list. And also, we're not like selling Steelcase furniture. These are just things that these companies have come up with that they've contacted us. Let your clients know these things are available. And so this mobile UV sterilizer disinfecting lamp, this is something that can be used again, maybe in limited spaces. I'm sure it's not an inexpensive product, and might take a little bit of learning to use and to use properly. But this is an option that you could go with. Protective acrylic partitions, and these are the acrylic partitions I was showing on the entry desk or at the administrative desk. This one is by Lumicore, but these are things you could take a look at. And I will have. I believe we're providing a handouts or email or a PDF that has all this information in it. If a link doesn't work, please let us know, and we'll make sure that we get one that does. Steelcase, we talked a little.
Sean,
yeah.
That we do have one question on that. Is that if somebody needs a cost estimate, if all else fail on one of these products, they can at least contact you, and you can point them in the right direction. Correct?
Right. Yeah. We take a look at the space, what your needs may be, how many of these partitions may you need, or what's your layout going to look. And we are in contact with these suppliers, and we can get you, work with you to get an estimate on what that may be. Steelcase has both a furniture layout, they have space recommendations, space layouts, as well as some products on there you can take a look at for post-COVID. The sanitizing stations that you see everywhere. This one is Mighty Built. And then again, this is that Erlab Halo Air Purifier. This is it doesn't connect to your HVAC. It's a standalone unit, and it does filter viruses as well as bacteria. Another thing to consider when you're looking at cleaning is what do you have in your room, and then what's recommended by the manufacturer of your product. So if you've just renovated or you have a newer facility and you don't want to, ruin your warranty or your products that are in the room, many companies do have recommendations on how to sanitize and clean their products safely. And so here I've got Formica, or we've got wall covering. Impro is a wall covering, a wallpaper company, fabric cleaning, and how to do that. And then also, this is Shaw. Maybe you've heard of Shaw Contract. They do flooring, and they have some ideas for putting arrows in and social distancing that you can put right into your flooring. That it helps with circulation and those sort of things, as I talked about before. So even if we're not looking at social distancing, it's a visual to keep kids moving in one direction, or your students moving in one direction, and not running into each other in the hallways. So we did put this slide in for questions. I know that there were some questions while we're going through. I can't see the questions while I'm presenting. So if there's any others, just let me know.
Yeah, Sean, I think right now we've dealt with all of them. There might be one or two more. I mean, we've got quite a long list of questions here for our SME, so we might have another one for you as we get a little deeper into them, but I think that's all of them for now.
Okay, well, and again, these are professional recommendations and recommendations from suppliers and just things that we've taken a look at as we're working through schools and that small group of superintendents. So here's my contact info. It's going to go away, obviously, when I stop sharing, but there will be a handout or a email provided by the North Dakota Safety Council that has all our contact info. So feel free to contact us. We do have a task force set up for K through 12 schools and reopening and helping you guys out. So let us know if we can do that for you. I'm trying to get back to the actual. There we go. I think I did it.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, you bet.
Okay, everybody. We're about to start our subject matter expert session. And I think all but one of our subject matter experts are on and ready to go. So, and we've got quite a few questions, and there's still time for you to submit more. So we're going to start relying on our experts to answer some of these questions. And again, if there's other questions that you think of, please submit those. Our first question is, we're gonna submit probably this one to both Terry, our industrial chemical person, and also maybe our representative from the North Dakota Department of Health, which I'm pretty sure, is that you, Laura, instead of Larry today?
Actually, it is Larry Dunn.
Oh, hey, Larry. Okay. So for you and Terry, and if you both want to chime in on this, but the question is about hand dryers in restrooms as opposed to, actual disposable paper towel products. Are there any concerns about a school that has only hand dryers in restrooms? Any issues with disinfection or any other concerns about hand dryers?
Well, I think from a health standpoint, I think there could be some concerns from the aspect that when you're using a dryer such as that it does get aerosolized. So I think the best recommendation would be probably not to use those. Obviously, if you have those, you may look at the possibility of doing something else besides using an air dryer.
Hey, could I jump in real quick on this question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, this is Sean with the EAPC. One thing that I did want to mention, we're looking at the restrooms in our presentation, is many schools, your paper product supplier, whether it's toilet paper or the soap in your restrooms, they will provide free. And I'm not going to quote this for everyone, but most of the districts we work with, they were able to get, the touchless paper towel dispensers as well as soap dispensers. I've even seen some with a little school logo on them, and other things like that. They got those for free as long as you kept buying their product. And so that could be one option that you can take a look at, is whoever provides your toilet paper, your paper towel, those suppliers may give you some free dispensers that you can then put into your restrooms.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, I think there's definitely going to be some, temporary solutions to those people that only have those dryers in their restrooms. So Good question.
No.
Terry, did you have anything to add on that as far as?
I would just maybe add that if you require them to grab a handle to get out of the restroom, that you might want to provide them with paper towels or some other method. Not every kid's going to use them, but at least the ones that are trying to be cleaner are going to have that option. If they have to use a hairdryer, but then they have to touch a dirty handle, you sort of defeated it.
Very good. Thank you. Our next question, probably going to direct this to our representative from DPI. Joe, are you on the call?
I am.
Okay. So the question here is about that, in the DPI document that you distributed, it talks about, wanting to set up that isolation room or area that if there's somebody that's symptomatic, that you can hold them, until they can be transported off the property. Do you have any guidance on privacy? And this is a question from Dave, of an individual while creating an isolation room seems like a tricky situation for small schools. Would you have any thoughts or ideas on how to ensure privacy of that person that's now symptomatic? Or do you see that as a concern?
Well, that's the first time I've heard that question. So that is a concern. I'll have to write that one down and get back to you. Okay,
great. And that was from Dave Wheeler. So Dave, if you want to shoot us an email and we can put you in contact with DPI and they can follow up on that for you.
The one thing I can say is, as long as we, I kind of think of a kid that's just sick, that's in a room, but I can see how a HIPAA violation can happen if you have a separate room for COVID. So that is actually a great question, Dave. So I'll research that and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. So our next question is from Catherine, I believe. What are your thoughts on how necessary is it to have a school nurse kind of in this time frame that we're in? And I'd probably like to direct that to Dr. Saxon from Sanford. Are you on?
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And then after you're done, maybe if we could also hear from Larry at the Department of Health, if he has anything to add to that, and maybe even DPI. So go ahead. What about the importance of a school nurse?
I think a professional school nurse is a plus in a school setting with this COVID environment. Obviously, they need to be well versed with what COVID symptoms are and what kind of restrictions students should have if they do exhibit symptoms, what kind of mechanisms need to be put into place to protect the other students if a student appears to be sick. I think it's absolutely necessary for a nurse to be there at that time. And maybe it won't have to be the entire time at this point, but I think when the schools initially open, I think a nurse is a must-have.
All right, very good. Did any of our other panelists want to add anything on the whole school nurse issue? Maybe anybody from DPI or Department of Health?
Yeah, this is Larry from the Department of Health. I agree with Dr. Saxon. It would be nice if every school would be able to have a nurse on site. Unfortunately, that's not the reality. So when you address these situations, if you're not able to have a nurse, certainly look and see who might be a consultant in a community, local public health, or at a private clinic, and have somebody there at the school that's comfortable with dealing with the situation, and certainly has some other healthcare professionals that he or she could consult with involving COVID and other school health issues.
I will say, our department, we are not the health experts. We're the education in the education realm. I will say we're working on new guidance for fall reentry, and consulting with the public health unit is a necessity. So definitely working with your local public health unit, especially in those schools that don't have a school nurse or can't find a school nurse, would be beneficial.
All right, very good. Next question, and Larry, this might be a question for you. Also might be a question for Joe at DPI. The question is from Hattie. Are N95 masks going to be sent to the schools so that they would have them available? N95 respirator.
From the health department standpoint, I'm not aware of that, but I think Joe may have some insights into that.
Right now, what we are workshopping, again, we're working on the guidance now. It's guidelines for when using masks. We don't have anything in place for receiving them. That would be the local district's responsibility.
Okay. And Dr. Saxon, could you maybe give us some insight into, what's the current supply issues in North Dakota? What's Sanford saying as far as being able to order and get N95 respirators?
At this point, N95 is still somewhat scarce. We are basically using N95 only for in-house hospital COVID positive patients and COVID floors. Most clinics are still using a surgical mask. Nurses are still using a surgical mask unless they're involved directly with COVID positive patients. So there still is a scarcity. I think surgical masks are pretty much out there without too much lack as far as being able to get them, but N95s are still somewhat scarce.
Very good. Dr. Saxon, so the scenario might be a student develops symptoms during the course of the day. They're sent to that isolation room. The people that would be responsible to be with that child, to interact with that child until they can be picked up or taken to the doctor, or taken home. Do you think would an N95 respirator be warranted in that scenario, or would a simple mask suffice?
Until you know if the student is positive or not, an N95 might be a good overall thing to have for that one individual that's dealing with a sick kid. Obviously, the sick kid needs to wear a mask as well just to prevent spread, but the N95 is just kind of like a double protection for that person taking care of that student. So remember, you can use N95 several times. It's just not a one-time use. You can use them actually for a week at a time, as long as you are cautionary as far as how you let it sit afterwards and what kind of make sure it dries out and over a period of 12 to 24 hours. So N95s are reusable, and I think for the school purposes, the nurse or the health person that's taking care of the sick child needs to have one.
And I'll just add on to Dr. Saxon. I certainly agree with him, but we have to remember that an N95 is actually a respirator. And so it's not something you can just hand out to somebody. There needs to be a medical certification, training, and fit testing actually of an N95. So if you're going to utilize an N95, you need to understand that you have to have basically a respiratory protection program for the user.
Yep, very good. All right. Next question. And this will probably be for Larry at the Department of Health. Larry, if a large school district has multiple buildings and a case happens in one or two buildings, does that impact all the other parts of the school to be closed? And we kind of touched on this a little bit during the presentation. And I think a lot of it's going to depend on the contact tracing done by the Department of Health. But if you can maybe expand on that, Larry, that would be great.
Sure. As we I'm sure that earlier you talked about what constitutes a close contact, and that's somebody who was within 6 feet of somebody for a minimum period of 15 minutes. So when we do the case investigation, the contact investigators, we look at identifying those close contacts and then suggesting they go into a quarantine situation that identifies the close contacts. So it would only be a concern if multiple schools identified a child or a staff member that had close contacts in those other areas.
Excellent. I think this one will be for you as well, Larry. And the question's from Dave. Am I correct in thinking that the state will identify individual counties at different levels of color as this continues? Could Cass County be yellow and Walsh County be blue?
We're in the process of looking at that. Right now, as you're aware, we just have a color for the whole state. So I know there's some discussion about identifying counties and what threat that they are in for COVID. So I think there's probably a very good likelihood that will come about at some period of time. And some counties may be different than other counties as far as the risk of COVID transmission.
Okay, very good. Looking through some questions here. This will be from maybe Larry or for Joe. Joe, why don't you take the first shot at this? The question's from Jeff. Does DPI or state agencies have grants available for cost of products for COVID safety in schools, like barriers and other mitigation options?
Yeah, we have the ESSER funds, which were given to our department to districts. Districts had to apply for the funds. Jeff, I don't know if you're a superintendent or not, because you would have received that information from Lori Matsky here at our department. If you're not a superintendent or principal, I'd suggest you contact your administrator. But those funds are available.
Wow. Okay, very good. And this will be a question for Dr. Saxon. Dr. Saxon, this question is from Jenny. Does Sanford provide the N95 respirators if staff go in for fit testing?
Yes, they do.
Okay, so is that a N95 respirator? They can go in, if they go to Sanford, they can get fit tested, and then they can leave with that mask?
Normally, that's what we would try to do. Obviously, we have a limited supply, but we try to be as kind and generous as we possibly can. So we have a lot of individuals who have been fit tested, obviously through the Sanford footprint, and we give them that mask when they are fit tested. But of course, one mask only lasts so long, and so you still have to have a supply somewhere if they continue to use the N95.
Very good. Let's see. Next question will be for Larry. Larry, this question's from Marvin. Is the 15 minutes consecutive or aggregated during a class period, for example? And then let's see, the 15 minutes or 6 feet time frame, 6 feet time frame. I think I'm getting that question right, but I think it's consecutive minutes versus a cumulative short bursts of time in contact with that person. Does that make sense, Larry? Larry, are you there?
Yes, you're correct. It's It's consecutive 15 minutes. It's not 5 minutes here, then an hour later, 5 minutes, and then maybe 2 hours later. So it's a successive 15 minutes in one time period at 6 feet or less.
Okay, very good. Let's see. And this might be a question for Joe. Joe, are you? We had a question from Hattie. If the students are going to need masks to have at school for bus rides and certain activities, is there a plan for the students that can't afford those supplies?
Okay, so as I said earlier, the ESSER funds. I was looking at the usability of the ESSER funds, and it says you can purchase cleaning supplies, and there's one bullet that does say anything else that you like, kind of a catch-all you aren't conducting school. But the guidelines right now we have, and again, this is not finalized. We have guidelines on if a school would require at the local level if they would wear masks. So the guidelines we have currently don't have a mandatory mask wearing. That'd be up to the local school district. And if you would do that, it looks like there are funds to purchase those masks.
Okay, very good. And Teresa, are you with us?
I am, but for some reason it's not letting me see you. So yes, I'm here.
Okay, yeah, we've got our video shut off here, but we can hear you nicely.
Okay.
I've got some very good questions for you.
Okay.
The first one is from Jason, and this question is, what if the student a staff member is working with has some anxiety when wearing a mask? Maybe they get kind of claustrophobic or have trouble breathing. Should then the staff member just wear the mask? Is there a way to work with that student at all?
That would be something that I wouldn't be able to answer as far as what protection germ-wise and virus-wise it's going to do, because obviously it's going to need to go both ways on that. So I guess it might be a sensory thing, because I'm guessing they're going to be experiencing some sensory overload with some of these kids. When we've got kids on the spectrum, they tend to respond to seams and tags and things like that. So I'm guessing they're going to find, especially in your ED population, you're going to find some struggle with being able to maintain the mask. And I think that's going to come with the need to have some creativity with making sure whatever material it's made out of, whatever it's used for, helping with maintain it on their face, that they're using some sensory calming materials, some fuzzy materials versus your stretchy, I can't think of the word for our masks, or the band, the different things along that line. So your sensory piece is going to be huge. So I would always encourage you to visit with your OT staff within the school to see how to meet that sensory piece. The other thing is if it's a visual thing, I know there are some businesses that work with speech and language, and they've got the clear screen that you can see the lips on. That may or may not be something that would be helpful, but that's going to be a challenge, I think. But it's going to be two different answers: one for your virus protection and one for what's sensory calming for the kid.
So, Teresa, just to follow up, because your staff does currently work with children, and your staff and the children use masks, correct?
Correct.
So what has been Nuvation's experience so far with in other words, has the majority of the children responded well to wearing of the mask? Have you seen a lot of them that, give you pushback on wanting to wear them? Like, what has the experience of the clinic been so far?
So far the clinic hasn't had any real issues. Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So far, our clinic hasn't had any issues really with any of the kids. We've got the masks that are the kid size that have been very user friendly. The lady that was kind enough to make some for us has made them kid friendly, and the kids just know that this is the way it is, and it's introduced that way. And most of them are doing some sort of art or play therapy, and the therapist is wearing it as well. So it has become a norm for them, and we haven't had that become a problem yet. But I'm assuming that when you are moving towards some of the population that tend to have the more intense ED issues or sensory issues that I know all the schools are going to experience, that may be a different issue, but that can be a fix with changing the material and the strings that are holding the mask on, so that it wouldn't be as overstimulating for them and irritating for them.
Okay. So in your opinion, like even something as simple as kind of the design, the type of materials, kid-friendly being, like, some superhero themes and things that kids kind of like, that can also play a role in their decision whether to wear it or not?
I think so. And I've seen some masks be held on by almost like a fleece string. So that is certainly going to be less irritating for those that are more sensory reactive. And that can be better. But the kids that you're going to struggle with are going to be some of the ones on the spectrum that tend to react more to touch and material and the confinement, that type of thing. Sometimes anxious kids will be on the spectrum sometimes, or in that version of the spectrum, sometimes not. But I think it's about acclimating and working with them. And the benefit of the school year is that they're going to have a whole summer of exposure to mask wearing and seeing it. So it's going to be pretty normal, I think.
Okay. Thank you so much. And then kind of the second part of that question, Dr. Saxon and Larry from Department of Health. So if there is a situation where a school staff member has to be close to a student, I'm assuming that both of you would, if the student simply refuses to wear the mask, that you would definitely recommend that the staff member wear one. Am I assuming that correctly? I'll let you guys answer that question.
Absolutely. Obviously, it'd be ideal to have both wear masks, but if that is just not possible, at least that teacher or para needs to wear a mask.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you. So, Teresa, this question is for you. So what do you think about dealing with a child who is already, kind of worried about getting COVID-19, and they're just having difficulty focusing in the learning environment because they have general anxiety about getting sick? Is there any tools or suggestions you could give educators on that?
Well, I think that the best approach is going to be to focus on the education and focus on making sure that they're aware what procedures are being utilized in the school to help minimize risk. But that becomes a balancing act, because for your real high anxiety, you don't want to go through too many details too often, because they can then become obsessive about those details and those patterns, and then you shift to another issue. So I think doing just some basic education of here's what the school is doing, here's what our procedure is, here's what we're going to be doing in our classroom, here are the rules and procedures in our classroom, and if at any point in time you are uncomfortable or worried, here are options for what you can do to help be able to verbalize your worry in a way that isn't destructive or creates some chaos in the class, but also makes it easier for them to share the concerns. So I had written down some of those options on the guidelines that I had wrote, but you can have with your teacher, if there's a high anxiety child, there can be some sort of cue or some sort of symbolic item that they use to cue the teacher in to let them know how they're feeling, or if they're feeling additional stress. There can be a little box of notes and questions for the teacher with letting the teacher know if there's somebody in the class that's struggling, and it would be privately shared, but addressed as a classroom without it being noted to who owned that concern, those types of things. But having some sort of manner of communicating that with the student to the teacher in a way that doesn't make the student feel like there's something odd about them. It, again, making it very normalized, making it very much a part of the routine, very matter of fact, is going to help reduce some of that anxiousness.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. This next one, I'm going to direct this question to Larry and Joe, and then, I think Teresa has somewhat addressed this from a behavioral health standpoint, but when they're done, Teresa, if there's anything you want to add. But the question is, how will this work with kids who are handicapped, especially one that refuses to keep a mask on? Larry from Department of Health and Joe from DPI, I'm assuming that there's only so much that staff can do, right? You can encourage students to wear masks in certain environments, but I'll let you guys answer that question.
And from a health standpoint, obviously we talk about masks, and it's very important that people try to wear masks, but we just know that some people can't for a variety of reasons. And so as the schools are developing their plans, they need to put that, how to address the situation where a child or a staff member or whatever, just for a variety of reasons, cannot wear a mask. Obviously that's preferred, but we know in reality that's not going to happen all the time.
Yeah, this is Joe. I concur with Larry. I mean, it's just not a reality that force children, especially I was a special ed teacher, and I had all different levels of students, cognitive disabilities, learning disabled behavior. Of course, you want to create maybe systems and a culture in your classroom on the importance of wearing it. But you can't get 100% participation, but really abiding by the strict safety protocols is the best outcome during this time. So we will have some special education guidance from our special ed unit coming out as well. And I'll let Jerry Tevens, our special ed director, know if there's any techniques to help ease students' minds and maybe motivate them to wear masks or protective equipment, if there's any resources out there to include that in the guidance.
And this is
Go ahead, Teresa.
Yeah, just to tag on to that, normally with your ED special needs population, whether it's a lack of interest in cooperating or a physical struggle, token systems, incentives, having it built in as part of a plan of rewards, just like many of the other systems that they use for compliance in the educational system. I think you could try to use that route to incorporate it into them. The students are going to be aware of that type of system anyway, and it could just segue into some of what they've already experienced as far as those types of routines. And you may gain a little bit more compliance on, at least on the behavioral end of it. But the other part that could be of benefit is there's going to be peers around that are going to be doing it. So depending on the day, they may or may not be interested in merging with that. But again, that token system to try to stimulate cooperation.
Okay, thank you all. So this next question, probably for Department of Health, I would assume, but it's from John. So if a student is sick and leaves school, They just want to verify what is that minimum protocol that they need to meet in order to come back to class. I'm assuming, Larry, that's that 72-hour window that we've talked about, or is there any other guidance to give the schools?
Well, it's kind of a difficult decision. Obviously, if a child leaves school and they're ill, are there signs and symptoms of possibly COVID? And if there are, then certainly they should discuss with their healthcare provider and the possibility of COVID and getting tested. Certainly, they shouldn't come back to school until they've resolved whatever reasons they are ill. So whether it be 72 hours or depending on the situation. But certainly, if they are ill and there's certainly a concern for COVID, they certainly should consult with their healthcare provider.
Okay. And then if a school has individual questions about a specific case, they can always reach out to the Department of Health for guidance, correct?
Well, certainly we'll be more than glad to provide consultation and some expertise, but there are some other, a healthcare provider, a local public health nurse, and other healthcare professionals that may be able to provide them with some valuable information.
Okay. Thank you. Our next question is, I guess this could, I'll let you all decide who wants to chime in on this one. I think it's several probably different venues as far as an answer. So do you suggest all classrooms, especially elementary classrooms, have lessons on how to deal with the fears of COVID at the beginning of the school year? So I'll just open that up to any of our experts that want to chime in on that.
Teresa, I'll let you go first.
Can you repeat that last piece?
Especially for elementary classrooms, do you recommend that they have lessons on how to deal with the fears of getting COVID at the beginning of the school year?
Absolutely. It goes back to the more you can be prepared and preemptive, the more you're going to reduce the potential anxiety. When kids have fears already, they're going to seek out answers, they're going to seek out information, and they're going to formulate their own answers. And so just by not talking about it doesn't mean that it's not an issue. It means that you are risking them getting inaccurate information and feedback. So you started off right away with, here's what we're looking at, here's what our plan is, here's how we're going to handle this, here's what you might have as feelings that happen with this, here's what we do with that, here's how we handle this, here's who your resources are. And you formulate a plan as a team, and you're all in it together type of an approach. And then it becomes normalized in the approach and normalized with those feelings potentially coming out, which then makes it easier for them to address them when they are coming out, because they're going to happen. And sometimes it's going to be the kid having the feeling because of their own anxiety. Sometimes it's going to be residual because you're sitting next to a kid that's highly anxious and you may not be nervous about COVID, but the kid next to you is so wound that they're making you uncomfortable. So addressing it very directly, but with kids, depending on the age, you don't want to over-educate, because sometimes we as adults give more information than they need, which then creates anxiety additionally. I would also add to that they would incorporate a plan of, if you have questions, where do you go to get correct information, and who should you not be asking about this, because they're going to be asking each other too. And again, depending on the age, you're going to get misinformation. So creating a chain, a path for them will be very helpful.
Okay, go ahead. Anybody else?
This is Joe. So I want Teresa to go first because I know she nailed the question. So on the other end, for teachers to receive training on their age level of so how to explain it to a kid that's in kindergarten is different than you would, of course, the kid is a senior. So getting that training on how to, and I know teachers had that training, a lot of training on age appropriateness. We always look back at Mr. Rogers' approach on communicating. As kids are going to have anxiety, but there are techniques per age group to how to instruct them and talk to them. So, but thank you, Teresa. I knew you'd get that one.
Absolutely. The other thing, just to add to that, it's going to be important that the teachers and the staff working with the kids have a real good awareness of where they're at, because kids are very perceptive. And if a teacher or one of the staff is struggling with their own anxiousness about it, then it might not be a bad idea to pull in a school counselor, a school social worker, somebody along that line to help with that process of educating so that it can be presented in a calmer fashion and help support that teacher as well.
Okay. Yeah, and I would just give this advice to all of our schools that are on that, when students and especially parents pop up with questions on COVID-19, on testing, whatever, send them to the Department of Health's website for accurate information, or send them to us, and then we'll make sure that their question gets into the hands of the appropriate state agency that can answer it based on what the question is. But, I love the idea of directing them where they can get accurate information. Unfortunately, especially with middle school and high school students, some of our staff has even already experienced, kids are sharing stuff on social media that is not accurate and causing anxiety. So let's definitely try to point them in the right direction. Okay, our next question, probably geared toward Dr. Saxon, also probably Larry from Department of Health. But if some children find wearing a mask uncomfortable, would you consider having them wear face shields instead? Or are you familiar with a design for a face shield that cannot be penetrated by the virus but still breathable?
So I would say that a face shield is a second best. In the fact that a face shield has a band that goes around the head. It's kind of cumbersome. It's a plastic sheath that goes from the top of the head to the bottom of the chin. But obviously you have breathing space on the sides, underneath, and sometimes even on top. And so though it might be a great mechanical barrier, still there's lots of seepage, and it might stop spit face on, but it won't stop it from the sides. And so I guess that's a second best option if they're willing to wear it. But I would think, in my estimation, that a face shield is probably more clumsy than a face mask. And I'm not certain if kids would be willing to do that. What do you think, Larry?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with what you said. It certainly is not as good as a mask, and it may be more difficult than wearing a mask. But it does provide some protection, but certainly not as good as a mask.
So would both of you also agree that before we even go to a face shield, we might want to consider like a temporary barrier, a piece of plexiglass between the provider or the teacher and the student that they're helping, or what, some sort of a temporary barrier in lieu of a mask or a shield? That could be another option, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, during your presentation today, I mean, there are certainly many ways that you can provide some increased protection, and certainly those should be looked into depending on the situation.
Okay. Thank you. Our next question is from Sarah, and it is the recommendation that all staff and students should wear masks at all times, or is it only at certain levels? So I'll direct this to DPI and also Department of Health. So what is our current recommendations for schools regarding cloth masks. Are they recommended? Are they not? Is it certain situations? I'll let you all answer that question.
So we are not mandating the use of masks equipment on any level. We are, in our current guidance, in our next group of guidance, our set of guidance, we do mention that the school must have guidelines for when coverings may be worn by staff and students as appropriate. So this local level will have to determine on when and if they would wear masks and how they would implement those protocols. That's from our department, DPI.
From the health standpoint, we've talked a lot about masks and certainly the protection they provide for people. The mask is certainly not going to be dictated, to my knowledge, as far as a requirement, but certainly highly recommended. The mask really is for those situations where you cannot social distance the 6 feet. And so that's the reason why that the masks are recommended. So certainly from a health standpoint, it'd be recommended, but not required at this point in time.
Okay, and would you both agree that if a school does have a person in the building that meets that definition of high risk, underlying health conditions or whatever, that might be a circumstance where they require that person to wear a mask, or people that are going to be in close contact with that person to wear a mask. Would you agree with that?
Well, from a health standpoint, certainly if you're in a high risk group or have a health condition which puts you at increased risk of complications, if you contract a COVID, you should take all responsible methods to be able to provide protection for yourself.
And we would, concur with the Department of Health. As we said, we are not the health experts. We're playing a sidekick role on those areas. As I mentioned before, though, the new guidance that will be coming out shortly, hopefully by the middle of July, we're trying to expedite the process. We want each school to confer with their local public health unit on their plan on reopening. So your local public health unit will definitely give you more information and guidance and guidelines on how to, implement and the safe use of equipment.
Okay, thank you. Our next question. Not sure any of you that want to chime in that might have some information on this. So it says, this is from Janelle. Currently, testing sites are providing results via phone. Is there a means for receiving a paper version of results that the family may have access to provide to school districts if they are willing? Thank you.
Don, you cut out the last part. Could you say the last couple of sentences, please?
Well, if you just start over, you were cutting out for me for the entire statement.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. It says, this is from Janelle. Currently, testing sites are providing results via phone. I'm assuming this is a Department of Health question, but is there a means for receiving a paper version of results that family can have access to and provide to school districts if the family is willing? Thank you. That's the question.
Well, I'm not quite sure what the necessity would be to have a paper copy for the school district per se, but I think in all situations, if there's some reason that you need a paper copy of a result, that could be arranged, yes.
Okay, and then we have a question, and we'll put this to Terry, our cleaning expert, but if any of our other panelists have any knowledge on this, there's a new cleaner. It's called Microban 24-hour. And the question is from Lori. It says, is this new cleaner that supposedly kills the viruses for 24 hours going to be sanctioned by school systems for cleaning surfaces? Does it really work? So have any of you heard anything about this new product?
Yeah, this is Terry. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the Microban before I answer that question directly. So Microban, actually, I'm very familiar with it. I used it for several years for killing mold spores. Microban started out as a quaternary disinfectant, which is what most hospitals, clinics, vet clinics, places will use. And it was designed that you could mop it on the floor and leave it behind, and it would kill bacteria for 24 hours. The truth of it is, unless it's actually wet, it doesn't really do a whole lot. So the hospitals would use it only on the floors because it can actually be somewhat irritating to your skin. Like the skin on your forearms, for instance, is fairly sensitive. So if you wiped it all over desks and left it there, you probably are going to have people having allergic reactions and mild burn marks from it. They changed the name of that product last year to MediClean, and they used the Microban on this new version of product that they have. It's not exactly a quaternary disinfectant. It's an ammonium chloride based. If you read the directions really carefully, you need to, like any other quat, that you're probably using a lemon quat, a pine quat from your supplier for cleaning your bathrooms and your floors now. It needs to be kept wet for 4 to 5 minutes to kill viruses. After that, it kills bacteria. It can prevent bacteria from growing on that surface for up to 24 hours. But if you actually read the directions on the Microban product, it only kills viruses during that first 5 minutes while it's kept wet.
Wow, thank you, Terry. Anybody else, any of our other experts want to weigh in on this new product? Okay. All right, our next question. What is the best mask to use if we need to wear it all day due to a person with underlying health conditions? So is there a certain type of cloth mask, for example, or are all of them created equal? What would any of our guests, whether it be Dr. Saxon or Larry from Department of Health, any recommendations you would have?
That's a good question. Obviously, the N95 is the best, but if you're going to be using on a regular basis as a employee, then some sort of respirator program has to be put in place, which is not economically feasible. Probably the next best mask would be some sort of surgical mask. And after that, then multi-layer cloth mask would probably be the third option. Larry, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I know I just a couple weeks ago read the advice from the World Health Organization about masks, and they recommend a 3-layer mask, such as a cloth mask. The trouble with the more layers you get, the more difficult it is to breathe in. So it needs to be a mask that's going to be comfortable. It needs to be a mask that's going to be worn. It needs to enclose the nose and the mouth. So certainly, as we know, that a mask, the more comfortable a mask is, the less issues you're going to have for somebody to wear it.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is for Tyler, probably at EAPC, but if anybody else wants to, has any knowledge about this. During the presentation, Sean, when you were doing your walkthrough and you were showing that device that's not connected to the existing HVAC system, for that you referenced. Either that or any other products that any of you would recommend that could be used in a classroom that could kind of process or reduce the water droplet particulates in the air and make the air safer.
So, I mean, short of, we can do better filtration at your existing heating and cooling equipment, or there are other manufacturers that make portable filter units, HEPA filtered. Some are HEPA filtered with UV lights to even help kill more of the viruses as well. But there are multiple manufacturers out there that do make other options that wouldn't be affixed to your ceiling like that was shown in the rendering. They're more portable that you could move from room to room.
Are air scrubbers a viable option, or are they too noisy for a typical classroom environment, Tyler?
I guess I don't know the exact answer to that. I've never been personally in the same room with one. I'd imagine there are some out there that wouldn't be too loud and disrupt the normal day-to-day of a classroom, though.
Okay. This question is for Terry. It says, what cleaner do you recommend for daily use for desks, tables, other shared surfaces in elementary schools that will kill the virus, but it's easier on hands and better for kids with allergies? So what would be the top recommendation of a product in that environment, Terry?
That brings us back to the quaternary ammoniums, the quats. The difference is you don't want to leave the residue behind. They should be cleaned and then, dried afterwards so that you don't leave a lot of residue behind. It's okay to leave it on the floors. That doesn't hurt anything. That's what all the hospitals and clinics do too. But when you use it on a table surface, it should be wiped off after the 4 or 5 minute interval needed to kill the virus. Then you wipe up the residue.
And I'm assuming for that employee that's using that product, right, they should follow all of the requirements or recommendations from the manufacturer on the use of the product, right, as far as gloves, et cetera.
Oh yeah, absolutely correct. And I mean, if you're going to use these things and they were designed to be mopped on or put down with an auto scrubber. So, maybe a rag is going to be better than aerosolizing it and creating a mist of something you're going to have to walk through that could get in your eyes and your nose. It's irritating to the respiratory tract. But keep in mind, there's things like Lysol. If you actually read the directions on a can of Lysol, a phenolic-based disinfectant, it tells you need to leave it wet for 10 minutes on the surface to kill the viruses like COVID. So you want to make sure that you read the directions very carefully and are aware of what those are. And if you are putting them in a separate container other than the concentrate came in, that you use secondary labeling to make sure there's no accidents.
Okay. Thank you, Terry. This next question is for Larry at Department of Health. And the question is from John. It says, last spring, there was some confusion as to who was our local health unit. Is it possible to get clarity and those entities get notifications so they are not surprised when we ask them for assistance? So what advice would you give John about basically verifying that he's using the proper health unit?
That's a good question. Every county has a local public health department. There are some local public health units that are single counties and others that are districts. Certainly, on the health department website, you can see all the health departments and local public health units and the telephone number or whatever. Certainly, if you call one and you could just ask them if they're in your jurisdiction, they'll let you know. But they are certainly valuable members throughout the state that the North Dakota Department of Health partners with. So, and I don't know, Don, if I can certainly email you the site, then you can provide it for the members, and so they know who the local public health units are.
I think you might still be on mute, Don.
Okay, thank you. John, if you would like to also send myself or John Wutad an email, our email addresses will be up here shortly. We will also be happy to, run this down specifically with your local health unit and make sure that you're in contact with them and assist, because we'll work with all of the local health units statewide as well. So we'll make sure that you're in contact with the proper one if you want to reach out to us. This next question is for any of you, Terry, and then maybe anybody else that has any knowledge, but what is the opinion of the use of fogging machines?
The fogging machines, again, they have a specific value, and in order for a fogging machine to work, you need to have an appropriately sized space that you can fill with a fog, and B, you need to have pre-cleaned first. It doesn't replace the act of cleaning. So what the fogging machines do is they put a really fine mist of your disinfectant material into the air. It makes all of the germs heavy. It captures them, brings them down, and can kill them in place. It's good for when you have a space that you are hard to get to all the places to clean, or you have a lot of soft materials in there, fabric, surfaces, carpet, things like that. Again, using those in mold remediation, we had to clean everything first. We'd run the fogging machine as a last step just to capture anything that might still be floating in the air. Typically, you're going to find mold spores, viruses, things like that are going to either, if they're not captured in filtration, they tend to fall out of the air within 24 hours. So for something like a school bus where you might need to very quickly, get it cleaned, that might be helpful. You wipe down the contact points, put a fogger in it. Getting into a single classroom, you might be able to fill that room. We actually have one here at the Safety Council. We've been experimenting with it a little bit. But you get into a large general area room or something with, 14, 20 foot high ceilings, a gymnasium, you're just not going to be able to fill it with a fogging machine. And you also want to make sure that the material that you're putting through is actually labeled for fogging, because some of them have too much surfactant, too much soap in them, and they're not considered effective as a fogging solution.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Well, that is all of our questions. I want to thank all of our subject matter experts. And again, if there are questions that come about even after the session is over, and we are going to leave the session open, if there's any specific follow-up or email addresses that need to be shared, that we have the opportunity to do that. But thank you so much for all of our subject matter experts in sharing your valuable expertise and time with us today. We would like to remind you, and Joe from Department of Public Instruction touched on this, that there is COVID-19 funding available through the CARES Act. And specifically, Appendix B of the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund will have guidance as to all of the things that are covered by that funding, but it's pretty broad. And we would, encourage you to research that portion of the CARES Act and then reach out to DPI for additional guidance. And then our resources, We do have membership available for school districts. As I said, we have 66 school districts that are members now. Some of our resources include the Alive at 25 defensive driving program, school bus driver training, and the mandatory defensive driving course for school bus drivers. We can design and write emergency plans and pandemic plans for schools. We can do on-site threat assessments and COVID-19 assessments for you, and we can provide training for your staff on school violence prevention and COVID-19. So please feel free to reach out to us. Here is our contact information, and we would like to invite all of you to give us a little bit of feedback on the session today. This is our third of 8 free webinars, and we are constantly tweaking and changing and updating and trying to make the information as usable as possible. Our mission here at the North Dakota Safety Council is to prevent injuries and death to the citizens of North Dakota. And our school children are our most valuable resource. And so whatever we can do to protect the kids, we're going to try to do that. So thank you again to everybody. Thank you to our subject matter experts. We will leave the session open so that you can provide us that feedback. And then again, if there's anything else in the Q&A that you want to reach out to us, please feel free to do so. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day.